Jeremy there too. Well, with me here in the studio is Dr. Salava Ibrahim, who is a lecturer in international development at the University of Manchester. She is also Egyptian, and also Yusuf Taha, one of our BBC staff here, an Egyptian as well, who has just returned, actually only last night, wasn't it, Yusuf, from Cairo. I wanted to bring in some of the social media comment that we've been receiving. We have literally been inundated, you can imagine, by Egyptians particularly, wanting to share their experience with us and tell us what they've been seeing. Let's bring you some of those if we can. I've got them just here on my laptop somewhere. One moment. Hisham, to start with, who is a resident of Alexandria, who says, I work in Cairo. It might be bloody Friday, but I will stand outside my house tonight to show the police my support. As also in Cairo, I'm not too scared to go out, but I'll be very careful around members of the Muslim Brotherhood. They are very charged. Marwa tweeted us from Cairo saying several demonstrations are being attacked, shots are being fired. This is horrible and I feel sick. And Alyssa says the situation is going from bad to worse. People are extremely enraged. Marches are coming from all corners of Cairo. Before I talk to my studio guests, we're just taking our correspondents when we can get hold of them. Communication is quite difficult actually with Cairo, so we're just going to take this moment to talk to Hugh Sykes, who is on the line now from Cairo, right near Tahrir Square, I understand. Hugh, what can you see?
I suppose I'm near Tahrir Square. I'm closer to Ramsey Square, where all these awful events have been unfolding today. I'm looking down one of the leafy avenues leading towards Ramsey Square, and above the buildings around the square I can see smoke rising. There's a helicopter in the distance. But more tellingly, in the foreground, right in front of me, there is a man aged about 40 with a large stick directing the traffic away down a side street. And beyond him there's another group of men with large sticks, and they've built a makeshift barricade. There's an old oil drum with a pile of bricks. And these are all local people who are completely against the Muslim Brotherhood and former President Morsi, and totally on the side of the military and the military-backed interim government here, absolutely in favor of suppressing the Brotherhood demonstrations. And one of them has just told me, if the Brotherhood come anywhere near here, we will attack them, not only because we want to protect our property, but also because we deeply disagree with who they are and what they stand for. And the wider argument from many, many people here is that the Brotherhood, despite protesting that they would never stand for election, promising people, including me, that they would never stand for the presidency, reneged on all their promises, and then, as they see it, hijacked the democracy here in Egypt and tried to turn the constitution and the government into a machine which only acted in the interest of Islamists, and not even in the interest of the broader Muslim population, many of whom are not Islamists, but are simply devout members of the Islamic faith who do not believe that God and government should mix.
Hugh, we have been hearing people's fears perhaps about the Mubarak-style security state being revived. But is what you're saying is that that's what these people actually want in order for there to be security again, full security?
Yes, and this is very similar, the nature of these men. I haven't asked them specifically, did you do this in the Mubarak years? Because I might get a dirty look or worse if I did. But they remind me of groups of local people who, either spontaneously or because they were paid a little money by the Mubarak regime, would gather sometimes and make sure that anybody they didn't want in the neighborhood was chased away. And indeed, I was surrounded by a group of such people during the Mubarak years, about 8 years ago, who forced me to dance with them in the street and be photographed. And therefore, a BBC correspondent seemed to be in the photograph dancing with supporters of Hosni Mubarak. I don't know whether these are the same people or not, but there's the same kind of atmosphere about them. But looking on the charitable side, I think most of them are simply local people, shopkeepers, residents who do not want to be invaded by what they regard as unrepresentative and undemocratic fundamentalist Islamists from the Muslim Brotherhood.
Hugh, have most people on the whole, though, observed the kind of warnings and stayed home today? Does Cairo, in a sense, although these protests are going on, also feel quite empty?
Yes, it's actually interesting. After prayers on Friday, but it's not technically a holiday. There's time for prayers in the morning, and then life gets back to normal, and the city gets very busy. It was really quite busy this afternoon after prayers in this part of the city, which is not far from Ramsey Square, not far from Tahrir Square either. I just should mention, interestingly, there's a protest in Tahrir Square, a tented encampment there, which has not been cleared away by the military, because this is a tented encampment of people who are fully supportive of the coup, as the Muslim Brotherhood would call it, which removed President Morsi at the beginning of July. And Tahrir Square and those tents and those people are guarded by military vehicles. But a lot of shops opened around where I am. I've just bought some shampoo and I've just changed some money, and I'm about to go and have a cup of coffee and possibly even a shisha, a hubble bubble, in the shade somewhere while I quietly observe what's going on. It is very, very quiet, and I think most people are aware that if there are live rounds, if live ammunition it is likely to be used against protesters, there's a danger of being caught in the crossfire or accidentally hit by ricochet, etc. So people are keeping their heads down. The terrible disappointment in all this is that there's a nightly curfew now, and at this time of the year, when the temperature in Cairo is 35 degrees every day or more, people like to be able to go. It's really frustrating for all Cairenes to have to stay at home in the evening and not be able to go out and do their kind of Italian-style passeggiata, window shopping up and down the avenues and enjoying the ice cream and the lovely food.
Hugh, I was going to tell you to take care on the streets of Cairo, but it seems you've got your afternoon well sorted out, actually. So thank you very much for joining us. Do enjoy your coffee.
Shukran. Masalama.
Let's return to our studio guests. It's nice actually to have a bit of lightness because it has just been awful, some of the things that we have seen today and what we've been talking about. Important though, I guess, to hear from Hugh that in many parts of Cairo, you know, life is continuing and people, although they have a curfew, which obviously is very difficult when it's so hot, you know, things aren't all doom and gloom in all parts of Cairo. Can we return though to just get your expertise in what we have been seeing in Ramsey Square, because that is truly an awful situation right now. We're hearing from our Middle East editor that many people are killed. The Muslim Brotherhood is saying 25 are dead. And one of the things that seems to have emerged is this started because the police station there was attacked. Can you just put that into context for us of what we've seen in the past and what you think could have happened?
I think a lot of Egyptians are having what you might call a déjà vu of the 28th of January 2011, where that was the start of the fall of the Mubarak regime, where there has been a systematic attack on the police stations throughout Egypt. And we saw during the last couple of days, as well as today, that the attack on the police stations, as well as particularly a police station in Kurdessa, where all the officers were killed and their bodies were also destroyed and photographed. I think these are the images that a lot of Egyptians are afraid to be repeated and lead again to. That was the start of the downfall and the breakdown of law and security in Egypt. Now, the army, on the contrary, is trying to give the impression that no, we are having a strong grip on security and we're not going to let this to be repeated.
I mean, Yusuf, is it the case at the moment that no matter what, the government and military cannot be seen to be showing any sort of weakness? Is that their priority?
Absolutely. The government and the military do not want to be seen as weak and not in charge. What happened over the past year with Mr. Morsi in power as president, it was seen as a weak president. The presidential palace was besieged by protesters for the very first time. Even during the revolution under Mr. Mubarak, that never happened.
Because people wouldn't have dared.
They wouldn't have dared. The palace was very heavily guarded, and of course anyone approaching it would have been dealt with appropriately then and there. But under Mr. Morsi, his government was seen as weak, the prime minister was seen as weak, and his decisions were reversed once people protested against them. So, for example, he was carrying out part of the policy with the International Monetary Fund to obtain a new loan of $4.8 billion to alleviate the economic crisis in Egypt. Part of the deal was to reduce the subsidies for flour and bread, etc., and wheat. So he passed the decision to reduce the subsidies. People protested, and overnight he cancelled the decision. He abolished it. You know, I was in shift that night, and that happened several times. And very often I come on shift for the night, and I think, what is he going to cancel tonight? You know, and therefore he was seen as a weak president. And after a year, people did not like the direction in which he was taking the country to.
But Salava, if what about what Hugh was just saying there, that he's been speaking to people in Cairo who it seems kind of want a strong man back. They want that security apparatus that was they had under Mubarak to come back now because they want to feel safe.
I think the more the Muslim Brotherhood supporters are going to go into the direction of attacking public institutions, the more they're going to lose the sympathy. I think the only way for self-preservation at the moment is for the Brotherhood to recollect itself as an organization and to try and reinvent or try and revive its leadership. Particularly, many of those leadership, the Muslim Brotherhood leadership has been undermined by the Egyptian public for calling for violent acts as well.
And what are they hoping to achieve right now?
I think
the leadership, and also explain to us who is the leadership right now of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Well, many of the leadership are being under arrest at the moment, being charged for inciting violence and calling for violent acts, particularly during the rule of Mohamed Morsi. But those who are, I mean, one of the remarkable things was that none of the Muslim Brotherhood leaders were arrested during the clearance of the post sit-ins. So they are still there, but and as we know, it's a very hierarchical organization. So they are still giving orders to keep their crowds on the streets. And this is the last card they have in their negotiation, if they will negotiate with the current government and the army.
Are there any talks, Yusuf, taking place right now behind closed doors?
I'm sure there is. But last week we had the European Union's Foreign Policy Commissioner, Catherine Ashton, in Cairo. And there was a proposal through which to set Mr. Morsi free, drop all the charges against him. In return, he would resign. But also the other condition was to involve the Muslim Brotherhood in political life rather than exclude it and drive it underground, as was the case under previous President Mubarak and Sadat and also Nasser. So the Muslim Brotherhood does not want to lose everything. They were in opposition, they were underground, and then they became in office. And they feel now that they have been robbed, and because Mr. Morsi was democratically elected, they say that legitimacy has been attacked and violated, and they want to restore Mr. Morsi as the president of Egypt.
Thank you both. Let's just remind our viewers of what's been happening in the past hour or so. You're watching live pictures at the moment of Cairo. You can see many people have gathered there on an overbridge. Perhaps that's one of the ones leading to Ramses Square. It doesn't seem to be violent at the moment, but in Ramses Square itself, we understand that the security services have opened fire. The Muslim Brotherhood say 25 people have been killed. The official figure is actually lower than that at the moment. I think only 6 or 7 possibly, we are hearing from official sources. They are there, though, in defiance of the military. Clearly, we're also hearing 4 people have been killed in the city of Ismailia on the Suez Canal and elsewhere in Egypt. Clashes and demonstrations in Tanta and also in Alexandria. Well, following events for us from within our bureau in Cairo is the BBC's James Reynolds.
The Islamists of Cairo have decided to head to the streets. This is the result. Supporters of the Muslim Brotherhood have called for a day of anger across the capital. But the government is not ready to give up Cairo to a movement it now sees as an enemy.
The Muslim Brotherhood wants to rule and the army wants to rule. What for? It's become a mess, and I think whatever they do to each other, at the end, they will sit together at the table. And if they don't manage to sit at the same table, we will be stuck in this disastrous situation.
Earlier, workers cleared away wreckage around Cairo's Rabaa Mosque. For 6 weeks, this was an area controlled by Islamist supporters of the deposed President Mohamed Morsi. But the state has taken it back, and it plans to keep it. To the Muslim Brotherhood, this wreckage is now the symbol of a new Egypt, one in which Islamists are under attack. The Muslim Brotherhood wants to show that it is not finished. Its members want to prove that they can still command support from large parts of the country, but the authorities will be determined to stop them. James Reynolds, BBC News, Cairo.
We have a large team right across Egypt covering events for you. James is just one of our correspondents there. They're also contributing to our live page as well. And you can follow our Middle East editor, Jeremy Bowen. He's at Bowen BBC on Twitter as well. Michelle is also tweeting all her live updates to you as well. Well, with me here in the studio is Dr. Salava Ibrahim and also the BBC's Yusuf Taha. Yusuf, you were just telling me something interesting during that package about Ramses Square itself. Give us some idea of just how important this is for Egyptians, this square.
Ramses Square is where the central train station is. So trains coming from Aswan in the south or Alexandria in the north all stop at Ramses Square. There are about 1 million Egyptians coming into Cairo and going out of Cairo every single day. So they come in the morning, whether for work or to get some paperwork done at government departments. And therefore, there is very heavy people's traffic there. And it's a very busy square. There's also the terminal for minibuses, for small buses going into various parts of Egypt. There is also a bus terminal there. So it's a very bustling square.
Not today in the same kind of way, obviously, but if it's shut down or if there's damage, that's going to affect daily life considerably then.
It would paralyze it. Bear in mind, I need to say that a couple of days ago when I was in Alexandria, all train journeys were stopped to Cairo, and also every train from Cairo elsewhere was also stopped.
Can I talk to both of you about Alexandria, because you're both from there and there's all this focus because we have the live pictures and the demonstrations and everything coming obviously from Cairo, but we know there are protests taking place in Alexandria as well. Is the sentiment broadly the same? Is it the same polarization there?
Absolutely. Alexandria is also a very strong grip of the Salafis, which is more, even more conservative than the Muslim Brotherhood, and who have been divided between supporting the Muslim Brotherhood and some are not. But at the moment, there has been also a couple of weeks ago a major clashes between the Muslim Brotherhood supporters in front of Al-Qa'id Ibrahim Mosque, which is one of the largest mosques in Alexandria. So it's a very tense atmosphere there already, and the same kind of polarization. We've already seen people have died yesterday in Alexandria as well. At least 4 have been reported dead. So I think the image we see in Cairo is replicated throughout other cities as well.
These are actually pictures we're getting right now from Alexandria from a little bit earlier. You can see a protest there, but it seems
that's right in front of this
peaceful.
Mosque.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the mosque would be at the bottom left corner of the picture.
Yeah.
And further right is a little park. There is a car park underneath, and just across that there is the
okay, we're
coast.
just mixing off that picture because this is actually the live scene right now back in Cairo, but this is a funeral taking place of a member of the Muslim Brotherhood. These are live pictures we're getting in. They're not live, actually. We got them just a few minutes ago and we're bringing them to you now. Or could one of you, Yusuf, perhaps, were you able to see what was written on the poster? Yeah.
Actually, the placard reads, Asma, who is the daughter of one of the leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood, you had lived as an angel and now you're dead.
Let's remind everyone actually what happened a few days ago, Salava. This is, we got the news in that one of the key leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood's young daughter, she was 17, was she, or 18, was killed in the sit-in?
She is the daughter of Al-Biltagi, Muhammad Al-Biltagi, who was one of the major Muslim Brotherhood leaders. There has been rumors as well that the daughter of Khairat Shater had been killed, but then these rumors were then proven not to be the case.
Okay, and this, of course, inflaming tensions even more at the time, Yusuf.
Absolutely. Any loss of life would lead to reaction in Egypt, where people can be hot-tempered and also like to have the last word. So there is an action, there is a reaction, and it keeps going like this. This makes me think of old vendettas in the south of Egypt, for example, where, I don't know, a member of a family attacks a member of another family, and the vendetta continues over decades because none of them wants to put their hands up and say, right, enough is enough, and that's the end of it.
With some of the time we have left, I mean, you've both made it clear that everyone feels that they have a stake and no one's backing down right now, but you both seem optimistic that talks will take place, which is good to hear. The one thing we haven't mentioned is the role of the international community. I was just looking at our live page very briefly there, and we know that François Hollande, David Cameron, Angela Merkel, all planning to talk later today by phone about the crisis in Egypt. Is the reason that it hasn't been mentioned so far because it feels a bit to Egyptians that that's irrelevant, that international diplomacy simply doesn't have a place right now?
Well, it does have a place. We know that last week or so, Catherine Ashton, the European Union foreign policy chief, was in Cairo and was mediating, and that mediation had not succeeded. But inside Egypt itself, Al-Azhar, which is the highest Muslim Sunni authority in the world, had been trying to play the role of a mediator, bringing people together and various sides together. It's been extremely, extremely slow. Going back to the international community, for example, the American President, Mr. Obama, had criticized Egypt and criticized the violence, and the reaction was, this is terrorism, we're fighting terrorism. Mr. Obama cancelled joint military war games, which are annually held in Egypt. And the reaction was, well, some of the actual papers I was reading this morning saying, yes, we don't want the Americans here anymore because these war games benefit the Americans far more than the Egyptian army. You see, Turkey had been a very vocal critic of the crackdown on the sit-in. Now, we have to remember that Mr. Erdogan, the Turkish Prime Minister, had been very, very close associate of Mr. Morsi, the Egyptian president, former Egyptian president, now being removed on the 3rd of July. And he criticized dispersing the sit-in by force and called it a massacre, and he urged the UN Security Council to hold an emergency meeting to discuss Egypt. So today, Egypt had cancelled naval war games with Turkey that were scheduled to be held soon because they criticized Turkey for interfering in Egypt's internal affairs.
Slav, we've talked a lot about American influence with the money that they give to the military, the over $1 billion every year they give. But also we're seeing other donations coming in now. I mean, states like Qatar, Kuwait, the UAE also giving money. What role do they play? Or what influence do they have, I guess?
Well, they played a role last week when they tried to meet with the Muslim Brotherhood leaders as well as with the current interim government, trying to find a common ground in order to resolve this tense situation, which obviously did not lead to what they are trying to achieve in terms of allowing the Muslim Brotherhood to have a safe exit, if you might call it. Now, we need to be very careful of how the Egyptians interpret the international community's interference, because in many cases, once you start to attack the one side but not the other, or try to condemn the violence from one side and not the other, that leads to an increase on of popularity among the army, saying, no, well, actually, the army is really under pressure from the international community, and as Yusuf said, fighting terrorism, and the West does not want us to fight the terrorism, and we're under attack from the Muslim Brotherhood internally and the West.
Okay. Dr. Salava Ibrahim, thank you very much for being with us. Yusuf as well. It's been absolutely invaluable having you here in the Impact Studio. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let me update you on everything that we know right now coming out of Egypt, Cairo particularly. We know that security forces have opened fire on Muslim Brotherhood supporters who are holding what they have called a day of anger in Cairo. They have marched towards Ramses Square in central Cairo. We've got some live pictures just now coming into you. Nothing violent happening there at the moment, but this is perhaps just one of the routes, the bridges leading into Ramses Square. Our Middle East editor, Jeremy Bowen, has been in the middle of it all. He says he has seen at least 11 protesters dead, several dozen others wounded, and he says the situation there is incredibly tense and feels like it's escalating. Thanks so much for joining me and the rest of the team here on Impact. Thanks for being with us. Thank you both.
Thank you.